John Raposo was gunned down in a targeted hit on June 18, 2012. The Crown says it was part of a plot to steal a 200-kilogram shipment of cocaine from Raposo and split the money 3 ways. Dean Wiwichar, the alleged gunman, along with Nicola Nero, Rabib Al-Khalil, and Martino Caputo, are all charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
It's the night of December 11, 2003 in Toronto, Canada. An armored car driver named Joseph Bruni is parked outside a Royal Bank ATM in the city's north end, rigging the back door so that it could be opened easily. He then leaves the scene and a large white van pulls up with a bodybuilder, Michele Estante, and his personal trainer, Nicola Nero, inside. The men throw open the back door of the car and begin sliding the bags of cash in before fleeing the scene and hiding the cash away. Nero's share was high, some $1 million worth, more cash than he'd ever seen before at the age of just 26. Soon enough, however, Nero would find himself in prison, now a cocaine dealer, unwilling to give up his $1 million stash. There he would meet an infamous Toronto mafia boss, Pietro Scarcella. Little did the men know that their chance meeting would soon turn into a violent criminal scheme that would take place over a period of just 2 years. Those 2 years would put Canada's largest criminals behind bars for life, lead to 2 drug traffickers getting dismembered and tortured, burn billions of dollars away, cripple Nero, and bring the infamous cartels of Mexico into Canada's unstable drug market. This is the story of Nick Nero and the Wolfpack Alliance gang.
Follow-up investigation is going to result in a couple of vehicles being seized for further inquiry.
What were the males wearing at the time of the searches?
At least one of the males was wearing soft body armor. They were all dressed in predominantly dark clothing.
Fuck! Put that thing out of my face, man.
In order to understand the unique circumstances Nero would eventually find himself in, we need to understand the Wolfpack Alliance gang. In 2009, the Vancouver underworld was thrown into a period of chaos. People were changing their alliances fast, and a lot of gangsters were losing their lives in the process. The Wolfpack Alliance was a multinational gang formed in 2010 by a man named Larry Amaro, then 33 years old. Amaro grew up in his birthplace of Langley, a city in the greater metro area of Vancouver. Suffering from bullying in his early years, Amaro turned to a different path in life than his longshoreman father, and by the time he was in his adult years, he'd become a steroid-fueled, full-patch member in the Hells Angels chapter in White Rock. The general gangland anarchy that plagued Vancouver between 2009 and 2010 allowed the Hells Angels to get a stronger footing in the city, and Amaro was given the green light to form a gang he named the Wolfpack Alliance. The word alliance referring to the alliance he was planning on forming with members of other gangs. The Wolfpack was a large, spread out, multi-ethnic gang of aggressive drug trafficking millennials that used technology to run their enterprise, unlike the generations preceding them. However, we'll be focusing on a few key members of the gang. This includes Larry Amaro from the Hells Angels, Jonathan Bacon, a central drug trafficker in the Red Scorpions, although Bacon would be murdered by rival gangsters in the Dakdure group just 1 year later at a luxury hotel in Kelowna. Then there was James Riach and Randy Naker from the Independent Soldiers gang, another diverse gang that eventually come under the Hells Angels' control after a violent shooting in 2003. Later joining on was Rabi El Khalil, a representative of the El Khalil brothers gang who had ties to Mexico, which would become important quickly. Dean Woucher, Rabi El Khalil's top hitman. Martino Caputo, a Toronto property developer and representative of the Montreal Mafia. Johnny Raposo, Caputo's best friend and one of Toronto's top drug traffickers. And Frederick Lavoie and Timiloyan Seharis, drug traffickers who moved product from Europe and bribed Canadian truckers to move it around for them. The Wolfpack members were connected by the internet instead of geography or neighborhood status, using the PGP encryption program to communicate drug shipments, jobs, and even as far as murders. They felt confident, secure in their network, and were running a criminal enterprise in a new era of criminality.
Police insiders say he teamed up with this man, 35-year-old Larry Amaro of the White Rock chapter of the Hells Angels, and James Riach of the Independent Soldiers. Both were reported to be with Bacon in the white Porsche SUV riddled with bullets. Amaro critically wounded. Police aren't sure if Jonathan Bacon was the target. As for why this happened in Kelowna, Bacon might simply have been there on vacation and rivals were tipped. But police sources also say the Okanagan is a lucrative drug market without the heavy police presence of Metro Vancouver, and Bacon might have been trying to move in on the action.
Now a millionaire, Nero would begin floating around underworld circles until he came into contact with a Hells Angels member named Zaviza Drecic, a short, round, and greedy gangster who was willing to make his money in any way possible, or using anyone possible so long as he got rich off of them. Drecic pinned Nero as someone not particularly that smart or alert, and he knew he could take advantage of him. Drecic wanted to buy drugs from the Sinaloa cartel of Mexico, whom he had a connection to as a Hells Angels member, but he needed money in order to order the product in bulk. Nero and Drecic soon got into coke dealing, but in 2007, Nero was rounded up in a major drug bust against the Hells Angels, led by police informant David Atwell, that saw Nero in court facing 9 years. Now behind bars at the Beaver Creek institution, Nero would come into contact with a man named Pietro Scarcella, a Toronto mafia boss aligned with the Montreal Mafia. Scarcella had been locked up in 2005 after working with the Hells Angels to plan a hit gone wrong on rival mafia member Michele Morica. During the 2004 shooting at a North York sandwich shop, Morica and his men fled out the back, while Scarcella's gunmen sprayed the facade of the store with a rifle, injuring a civilian in the process. In 2007, while at the Millhaven Maximum Security Institution, Scarcella was ambushed and stabbed 7 times in his chest, almost killing him, and he was transferred to Beaver Creek, where he needed muscle to protect him. Enter Nero, a steroid-fueled former bodybuilder. Scarcella took Nero under his wing and had him around him at all times. In 2009, Nero received day parole instead of full parole due to him refusing to give up his $1 million stash, but he ignored all restrictions placed on him. Scarcella, aligned with the Montreal Mafia, got Caputo to hire Nero when he returned to Niagara Falls.
This is what police say Mexican drug cartels are slipping into Canada. $83 million worth of cocaine, destined for every corner of the country, and recently traced to a murderous cartel making inroads here.
Caputo saw money in Nero, but he knew he was a steroid head that was rife with insecurity, so he never allowed him full entry into the Mafia despite his Italian heritage. When the Wolfpack Alliance was formed in 2010, Caputo clicked up with them and became a member to gain access to their connections to the Sinaloa cartel. The Sinaloa needed an entry into Canada and saw the Wolfpack as the right route. Even if they weren't that smart or efficient as criminals, it's not like anything they did would affect the Sinaloa all the way south in Mexico. If the Wolfpack fell apart, that would leave the Sinaloa a gap in Canada, so it was a win-win either way.
After leaving a nearby halfway house, police believe the shooting was a case of mistaken identity. The apparent target, alleged gang member Randy Naker. He was murdered in Port Moody in 2012.
Starting in 2011, police began to watch Nero closely. It wasn't necessarily because of his criminal connections, but rather the unnecessary attention he brought upon himself. He was confined to a halfway house in St. Catharines 5 days a week as part of his parole, and for his 2 days off, he went to live in a condo in Niagara-on-the-Lake, the town where Caputo lived. In 2011, Nero met a woman at a gym in Niagara Falls, a rich 27-year-old MBA student named Tanya Del Fletcher, whose father owned a successful hotel in Niagara. She received acceptance into medical school all the way in Australia at the time that she'd met Nero, but turned it down to live with him. He was a large, rich, and violent drug trafficker who spent endless amounts of money on her. After getting with Fletcher, Nero got a Ferrari and a Lamborghini Aventador and began staying at her condo in Niagara-on-the-Lake. He then hooked Caputo up with Fletcher's sister, Tamara, her twin actually, and Fletcher purchased their condo from Antonio Caputo, Caputo's brother, at a significantly cut price. Having a Ferrari, Maserati, and Lamborghini outside the luxury condo building was fine, but what eventually caught officers' eyes was when Nero drove them to his halfway house. A man with supposedly zero income, living off of welfare, was suddenly popping around in an upgraded Ferrari, leading to many of the halfway residents reporting his suspicious behavior out of jealousy. Nero and Fletcher formed a bizarre criminal relationship in which she essentially served as his brains, teaching him how to communicate and close deals and organizing things for him while he did the drug-related work. He also formed a bizarre relationship with Caputo and Larry Amero, where officers noted Nero speaking almost subserviently to them, telling the shorter, same-age Caputo at one point he wished he could get a hug from him, and on many occasions praising Caputo's romantic escapades with numerous women, even cracking jokes about Caputo's genitals. Now connected to the Wolfpack, police began Project Ink, a surveillance operation into the Wolfpack Alliance specifically focused on Nero, Caputo, Amero, and Rabi al-Khalil. Nero had the dream of becoming Niagara's most powerful drug trafficker, and began forming connections to Europe through other Wolfpack traffickers like Siharis, a Greek-Canadian. Al-Khalil started using Nero to run coke into Niagara Falls from Buffalo, and Nero was bringing in some 1 million CAD for every 30 kilos of coke moved. By the end of 2011, he was moving 400 kilos a week. The money was never enough, however. Despite his success, he was constantly paranoid and tense due to his steroid abuse and overall abrasive nature. In February of 2012, officers seized $30 million in cocaine from one of Nero's warehouses, and they got the okay to plant wiretaps in his Niagara-on-the-Lake condo, confirming that Fletcher was the one organizing Nero's work and operations. On April 24, 2012, officers overheard her yelling at her common-law husband that he wasted too much time and money, and when he told her he had to talk with the Sinaloa and she asked why, he exasperatedly told her he just didn't understand what's going on, a response he used pretty often since he genuinely was confused a lot of the time. The pair talked pretty openly about Nero's work in the apartment, with Nero literally referring to himself as a gangster who committed crime and lived dishonestly. In March, Caputo learned that Nero was driving his Ferrari to the halfway house, and immediately ordered him to drive his 2001 Yukon Denali instead, as that was a much more believable vehicle. Nero followed the order, but was caught many times in his wiretaps raging about it, insulting his Denali, saying it was below him, and constantly complaining about it. In one wiretap, Nero was overheard telling Fletcher he didn't know how to actually test his coke purity, nor did he know that his employees were robbing him as his coke shipments were coming up lighter than usual. He also had no knowledge of the actual cocaine production chemistry, and while he was assured the coke he was getting was 98% pure, it was actually only 38%. He also had no idea how the actual costs of the cocaine worked, and was overheard raging about how he didn't understand why he was paying so much money. On May 2nd, 2012, Nero got a 45 kilo shipment of coke from Mexico, only to learn that a quarter of the batch was just baking soda and flour. Nero turned his rage towards Alfonso Enclima, a coke trafficker and car dealer who worked for Nero. The two had been talking about using Air Canada to fly drugs into Canada, and when Enclima brought up shipping product from Argentina, Nero told him that he was confused and that Enclima was supposed to organize the shipments himself. He berated Enclima often, mad that his employee couldn't test the coke purity properly. Eventually, he began doing a lot of Enclima's work himself per his girlfriend's advice. He told her in one conversation that Enclima was stupid and couldn't do his job, and that he planned to kill Enclima when she suggested that he just do the work himself instead of killing one of the only people they knew who was fluent in Spanish. Nero began talking to his contacts more directly, sending him texts in Spanish that Fletcher translated for him, even though he still had no idea what was going on, didn't understand her translations, and exploded into a rage. Nero began to form a network of drug dealers, getting Enclima organizing shipments into the UK through British Airways, where the cocaine was twice as expensive, had contacts in the Irish West End gang moving coke into Montreal, had a hidden Brazilian contact discussing bringing coke into Rio de Janeiro during the Olympics, and had his friend Reza Amin Torabi, a Mr. Canada champion, bringing coke from Peru to Vancouver for a 25% cut. There was money to be made, and despite Nero's lack of intelligence and constant taunting and mean jokes from the other Wolfpack members, they couldn't touch him. He was making too much money, and Al-Khalil acknowledged in one message that despite his annoyance with Nero, the man was too important. He was brash, angry, didn't take jokes or understand when others were trolling him, but he was in the gang. By early May of 2012, Nero was overheard bragging to Al-Khalil about being Niagara's most powerful drug kingpin. Just a few years prior, he was a failed bodybuilder with a stolen $1 million serving a drug-dealing sentence. Now, he had a luxury condo, 3 Italian sports cars, a rich girlfriend he planned on marrying, international contacts, and millions in cash. He was on the PGP encrypted network all the time, and openly talked about his work with no repercussions. But every good thing must come to an end, and as is the story with most successful gangsters, it would be a mixture of poor decision making and envy in June of 2012 that would bring down the entire Wolfpack.
Claims the trio wanted to kill Raposo so they could steal a large cocaine shipment from him. They also believe Raposo was a snitch who tipped off police, leading to a raid of Nero's property earlier in the year. The key evidence presented during the trial included encrypted messages exchanged between the 4 convicted men in the months leading up to the murder.
In mid-2012, issues formed between Martino Caputo and Johnny Raposo. Raposo, then just 35, had been a career gangster. He'd come up in Toronto's Portuguese underworld, abandoned by his father as a child. He became a fighter, a moneymaker, and a street gang leader by his teens. As a result of this, he soon became close to Eddie Melo. Melo was a Portuguese boxer from Montreal who'd been dispatched by the mafia to run their branch operations in Toronto, and he and Raposo began spending every day together, legitimately every single day. They were best friends, and Melo saw Raposo as his closest mafia ally, being the only man he could fully trust in the underworld and talk openly to. He took after Melo, dressing like him, talking like him, and was soon one of Toronto's top drug dealers, vehemently refusing to use product himself. He never drank past his limit and never snorted cocaine. He was healthy, had a family, a luxury home, had built another luxury home for his mother, owned a trucking company, and seemed like a normal, happy family man. On April 6 of 2001, Melo was gunned down in Mississauga, murdered by a rival Portuguese businessman who dispatched Montreal bank robber Charles Gagné to kill Melo. Raposo took Melo's place, becoming College Street's top drug trafficker, becoming close to Ndrangheta boss Giuseppe Orsino, and raising Melo's 4-year-old for him. He was also Caputo's best friend. On New Year's Eve 2011, the two celebrated closely, hugging and saying that they loved each other. But just 4 months later, Caputo and Nero were discussing murdering Raposo. The issues began with Nero, who was wildly jealous of Caputo and Raposo's friendship, and began convincing himself that Raposo was an informant. Nero was being audited by the CRA, but instead of suspecting that it was his unrealistic lifestyle and 3 sports cars that led to the audit, he believed Raposo had ratted him out. He and Raposo had their own issues. Despite meeting each other only a handful of times, Raposo was bothered by the way Nero acted and the way he spoke on the PGP network, often complaining that Nero saw him as an idiot. In April of that year, Nero, El Khalil, Caputo, and Raposo began formulating a 200-kilogram cocaine shipment from the Sinaloa cartel, worth some $5 million, and suddenly, a new motivation for the murder formed. On April 28, 2012, talk of killing Raposo began when Nero told El Khalil over the PGP network that he wanted to split the load 3 ways and cut out Raposo, calling him the biggest rat in the world. A third motivation soon arose, however, a love affair. Caputo, then dating Tamara Fletcher, was a playboy. He'd fallen in love with the waitress at a Toronto restaurant and began a romantic affair with her. However, the waitress was already in an affair with Raposo, who was cheating on his common-law wife with her. It was a betrayal of a close friendship. Caputo acted as Raposo's closest friend, but at the same time was sleeping with his girlfriend behind his back. Caputo soon became jealous of Raposo's relationship with the waitress and knew he could use Nero to kill Raposo. A cycle of betrayal fueled by jealousy soon formed. Caputo, jealous of Raposo's romantic relationship, Nero, jealous of Caputo's friendship with Raposo, and El Khalil, jealous of Raposo's money-making. It was the perfect storm. Meanwhile, tensions continued to form between Raposo and Nero. In one text to Caputo, Nero wrote out pretty openly, "We kill Zuriki, lol." Zuriki, meaning federal informants. On May 18, Caputo sent Nero pictures of Raposo, whom Nero had only seen in person a handful of times, as well as Raposo's home address and the address of the Sicilian Sidewalk Cafe, a coffee spot in Toronto's Little Italy that Raposo went to almost on a daily basis. Right after sending the message, Caputo went to attend Raposo's son's baptism. Nero wanted photos of the son as well, to give to whomever they chose as the hitman. Meanwhile, Nero began accusing Rabbi El Khalil of cutting the quality of the cocaine he provided him, and El Khalil, rageful at the accusation, threatened to kill Nero. As tensions rose between the Wolfpack, and as they planned his stressful and treacherous murder, Nero continued to complain over and over about his 2001 Denali, still mad about it. In order to guarantee the hit's success, Rabbi El Khalil gave the job to a man he nicknamed his best hitter, Dean Woucher. Wilcher, just 26 years old by 2012, had been a career delinquent. He was a 6'3", lanky man who spent his early years breaking into houses, getting into stabbings at bars, and driving around drunk and high. In 2005, however, Wilcher was slapped with a 5-year sentence. He made connections in prison. The prison life seemed to have disciplined him to a degree as a criminal, as upon his release, he knew what he wanted to do: murder, and be the best at it. Wilcher went to work for Rabi al-Khalil upon his release, and eventually made enough to get himself a luxury home in Surrey. He used this home as his base of operations, and soon enough had a stash of acting props to conceal his identity. Not just wigs and fake beards, but modeling wax, false noses, and latex masks. He had a cachet of weapons, vests, rifles, and video games, getting him the nickname Zelda on the PGP network, which he used obsessively. On the night of January 17, 2012, Sandeep Dure, member of the Duck Dure gang, went to eat dinner with a friend at the Sheraton Wall Centre in Vancouver during the Olympic Games, sitting at the lobby restaurant where El Khalil and James Riach, who watched Dure take a seat, then got up and left in a hurry. Wilcher then stormed the restaurant in a construction uniform and shot Dure numerous times, killing him. His friend came in after a smoke break to find Dure slumped over on the floor in a pool of blood, surrounded by panicked patrons. On May 21st, El Khalil sent Wilcher a message: 100 grand in cash for Raposo's murder, no questions asked. Wilcher messaged him within a few hours with, quote, "Ice cream boy is getting it. I'm flying there anyway, so I'll bang that one off for you, no problem." Wilcher, as it went for members of the Wolfpack, had never actually met the Toronto-based Raposo. He'd only texted him online before, but he wouldn't have cared anyway. He didn't care why Raposo was going either, nor did he ask. He needed to get paid, and even acknowledge that downtown Toronto was a police hotspot. 3 days after their conversation, Wilcher flew into Toronto and began patrolling the area around the ice cream store, making sure no officers were already on the hunt for him. He flew back to Toronto again 3 days later, and this time met with Caputo, who gave him all he needed to know about Raposo. This time, however, police were following Wilcher, him being suspect number 1 in the Sandeep Dure shooting. He became obsessed with Raposo, stalking his every move. He formulated an entire map of Raposo's neighborhood, and with his map, formed escape routes, estimating the time they'd take. On May 30, Wilcher reported that he, at any point, had 10 police cars following him closely, which El Khalil reported to Nero, who was confused and told him to drop the Raposo murder, but El Khalil wouldn't do it. Raposo had to go, no matter what anyone said. 50 kilos from Raposo's share of the coke deal depended on it. Wilcher began a correspondence with someone by the username Princess97 through a PGP encrypted network. He asked them to look up train schedules going into Toronto as he was too nervous to use his own laptop, and he explained that he had no options due to all the police following him. Princess97, using a different alias now, gave him a good piece of advice. It'd be better to be broke than life in prison, but Wilcher needed to get paid. He was advised a second time by another Wolfpack member to drop the contract and come home, but he gave him a similar response. On June 14, 2012, Wilcher made his final trip to Toronto by plane, stayed at the Fairmount Hotel under a fake alias, and got to work. It's now June 18, 2012. Johnny Raposo is sitting inside the Sicilian Sidewalk Cafe, watching the Euro Cup match on the cafe television. Dean Wilcher was seen by street cameras at around 1:40 p.m., dressed in a construction uniform, walking into the cafe. Raposo was too focused on the screen to see the 6'3" Wilcher walk in and sit down. He ordered himself a beer, watched Raposo for a while, then got up and drew a handgun. The cafe fell into panic as Wilcher popped Raposo 4 times right in the head. After fleeing the scene, Wilcher texted El Khalil that same afternoon, telling him the job was done, while El Khalil praised him and made a joke that being a hitman was too easy for him. Wilcher then explained the details of his entire outfit by text, essentially identifying himself in the street camera photos, and then decided to stay in Toronto for a few days to stay low. Caputo took it upon himself to go visit Raposo's now widowed wife, telling her that Raposo was his best friend and expressing sympathies over the murder. For the time being, the Wolfpack leaders felt safe. They'd done a good job, gotten away with murder, and had $5 million in coke on its way, but they had no idea that every message they'd sent through their encrypted PGP network was about to be in the hands of law enforcement.
35-year-old John Raposo was gunned down on the patio of the Sicilian Sidewalk Cafe, where a large crowd had gathered to watch a Euro Cup soccer game back in July of 2012. The jury heard that Nicola Nero, Martino Caputo, and Rabia Al-Khalil conspired together to kill Raposo. The man hired to carry out the execution, Dean Wichar, smirked at the verdict. Now, he walked away from the cafe disguised in a construction vest and hard hat.
On behalf of Johnny's family and friends, we want to say thank you to the jury, the judge, and the prosecutors today. Our hearts are broken. Justice cannot bring back the missing link in our family.
Just a few weeks before the Raposo hit, on May 23, 2012, officers boxed in and arrested Nero at his halfway house in St. Catharines, while Niagara officers arrested Fletcher at her condo, both charged with a slew of narcotics-related charges. Officers raided Fletcher's condo, seized $1 million in cash, her $750,000 engagement ring from Nero, and the couple's 3 sports cars, a seizure to which Nero reportedly cried for hours on end. But they also found something else bizarre, a small BlackBerry cell phone with a sticky note on it on Fletcher's kitchen counter. That phone was Nero's phone, which he left at her condo since he technically wasn't allowed to own a phone. In the sticky note, his email and the password for access into the PGP encrypted network that the entire Wolfpack ran their operations on. Without any extra effort, officers had infiltrated the entire messaging network where the gangsters openly discussed drugs, murders, women, steroids, and everything in between. On June 21st, 2012, Wilcher was riding in a taxi in Toronto when officers boxed the taxi in and grabbed Wilcher, arresting him for the murder of Johnny Raposo. El Khalil panicked when he got the news, and on the same day messaged Nero asking him if he was quite literally fucked. And Nero said bluntly that if Wilcher ratted, he was. To make matters worse, the coke finally arrived in Toronto, the drop-off point at a junkyard. But when Caputo went to get the product, there was nothing there. It had been hijacked, not by police. In fact, no one knew who'd taken it. But the coke was gone, and the Sinaloa wanted their money. The Wolfpack members responsible for the coke were threatened with torture and dismemberment for losing the shipment, sending Caputo into a panic. He immediately fled to Germany, hiding in Cologne and planning on going to Poland with a doctored passport. El Khalil followed suit, hiding out in Athens with a forged passport. Within less than a week, everything had fallen apart. With the Wolfpack now struggling, the Sinaloa cartel had an opening in Canada that they immediately began to fill, giving them entry into the country's drug market through the Wolfpack's incompetence as criminals. And things only got worse. On November 1st, 2012, the Sûreté du Québec, in coordination with other Montreal police agencies, launched the Project Locase raids, taking in 103 Wolfpack members from evidence caught by a wired informant. Among the men named were Amero, Siharis, and Lavoie. Siharis immediately fled to Greece, and Lavoie to Colombia, the two running with forged passports. However, they wouldn't be gone for too long. On November 20, 2012, Siharis was discovered laying in a field in Greece. Autopsy reports showed that he'd been tortured over a period of hours, his face burned off with acid while he was still alive, then shot in the head, set on fire, and thrown into a ditch. Lavoie, now in Colombia, began a drug smuggling ring down south with a Canadian martial artist named Stephen Skinner, a Nova Scotia native who'd killed 20-year-old Stacey Adams, gunned down in 2011 near Echo Lake. On May 11, 2014, Lavoie was discovered by a bridge in Sabaneta. Autopsy reports showed that he too had been tortured over hours and then chopped into multiple pieces, forcefully kept alive and conscious as his killers dismembered him, wrapped him up, and dumped him by the bridge. On February 16, 2013, Caputo was nabbed by officers in Cologne as he was on his way to flee to Poland, and a week later, Al-Khalil was arrested in Athens, both extradited to Canada in 2015, now facing charges including Raposo's murder, Dure's murder, drug trafficking charges in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, as well as their involvement in a slew of Wolfpack operations as a part of Project Lucchese. On September 9, 2014, Nero was convicted of being the Greater Niagara region's largest drug trafficker, running a $2 billion a year enterprise between 2011 and 2012. On parole the entire time. Fletcher was convicted 13 days later, charged with drug trafficking, but got parole by April of 2015 with the condition that the board be notified of any man she had a relationship with going forward. That same year, Al-Khalil and Caputo returned to Canada to face the courts for drug trafficking, while Reza Omin Torabi pleaded guilty to drug trafficking and got 7 years behind bars. On April 5th of 2017, Nero, Woucher, Al-Khalil, and Caputo went to trial for the Raposo hit, where their lawyer argued that the sum 41,400 messages sent between the group between April and June of 2012 were simply gangster role-playing, an act they got too deep into, and that Lavoie, by that point dead, was the one really behind the hit. On May 11, the four were all found guilty for killing Raposo, all four of them getting life without parole for a 25-year minimum, but it's likely that Nero will spend the rest of his life behind bars, as the government viewed his time on parole as a mockery of the system. While behind bars, Nero became victim to a murder attempt that almost got him, but the man who was sent to kill him missed with his prison knife, instead ripping out Nero's eye and causing him to be permanently blind on one side. With Caputo in jail, the Sinaloa cartel needed a body to pay for the lost cocaine and the $5 million they were owed. On August 18, 2019, Caputo's 64-year-old brother, Paolo Caputo, a civilian who used to run small gambling games for the Rizzuto Mafia, was standing outside his wine bar, the Domani restaurant, when a white SUV pulled up on the curb. A tall man jumped out, shot Paolo twice, dropped the gun, and fled in the SUV, leading Caputo's brother to die on the sidewalk. Meanwhile, Amero and Al-Khalil were on trial for the Dure slaying. At the end of August 2022, Amero received 2 counts for the Dure slaying and for the 2010 shooting of Dak Dure gangster Gurmeet Singh Dak. He'll be out around late 2027, but Al-Khalil's story went a little differently. On July 21st of that same year, Al-Khalil was being temporarily transferred through the North Fraser Pre-Trial Center when 2 men dressed in construction uniforms used an electric saw to cut a hole in the fence just before 7 p.m. Al-Khalil fled the center, jumped into their van, and sped off into immediate hiding. Police were called 42 minutes after the escape, and by that point, Rabi Al-Khalil was gone. RCMP officers released photos of the suspected accomplices, only for it to be discovered that the photos were stock images purchased online, not actual photos of the men that were seen at North Fraser. Al-Khalil, now most likely outside the country, is listed as one of Canada's top most wanted men. In April of 2023, it was reported that Martino Caputo was being ordered to pay child support to a woman he'd married while behind bars. He'd begun to see a woman named Robin Homeyer, a Toronto resident, between 2009 to 2012, and began to see her again after his arrest in 2016. She traveled to the Kingston prison to see him on a weekly basis, had video calls with him, and spoke with him over the phone 3 times a day for years on end. Caputo spoiled her to unreal degrees, sending her Cartier jewelry, 2 luxury SUVs, an $88,000 wedding band, and a Rolex worth over 20 Gs. On August 18, 2018, the couple officially married, and in 2021, Caputo smuggled out a sample of his sperm to get Homeyer pregnant. She gave birth to Caputo's son in December, and in February of the following year, he filed for divorce, but it was agreed that he would pay her $3,748 a month in child support, spousal support, and nanny costs, a ruling set with an indefinite date as Caputo continues to serve his life sentence, available for parole in 2042.